Hey everybody, this is Trevor Flowers from Transmutable, and welcome to part 4 of making 20 tiny Memex by 2022. If you haven't tuned into this series before, I am building 1/6 scale miniatures of a antique computing device that was never made, but was sort of an influential idea for people who went on to invent the internet, hypertext, and that sort of thing. I am making 1/6 scale versions of the Memex, so a person would be about 1 foot tall if they were 1/6 scale. There's been a lot of CAD and CAM happening in the background, and that has helped me to prepare for using the real materials to produce things that are like the final product. This is cherry hardwood that I'm rubbing with a sort of biodegradable, non-toxic cutting board oil. And the idea is that I'm testing to see if this cutting oil is good to use as a light finish on cherry wood. So here are the results once the cutting board oil has dried. I like the color. It's very similar to the color of the wood that I used when making a full-sized Memex back in 2014. And yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with that. I might do 2 coats for the final product, but even with 1 coat, it's actually pretty good. So it's still a little tacky to the touch. This cutting board oil can take a couple of days to dry, but it's not sticky. I like the color, and it's made of really nice materials. This is the little CNC machine I'm using to do all of the prototypes, and so right now it's cutting into a sheet of cherry wood that's the size of the desktop. So it's 260 millimeters wide. You can see here it's cutting the hole for the platen. Actually, it's cutting the rim around the hole that the glass will sit in. I have some thin acrylic that will take the place of glass since I don't want to ship actual glass. And this is the actual speed of CNCing. That is not fast. I'll speed up the rest of the CNC footage so that you don't have to watch it, but it is a bit like watching paint dry. I've tried different feeds and speeds for this machine, both faster and slower. And so with wood on a CNC, it's kind of a balance between moving too slow and not clearing enough chips to cool the head of the bit. In that case, you'll get smoking, and eventually the bit will degrade and either just stop cutting and start gouging, or it will actually break. On the other hand, you're trying to avoid going so fast that the little electric motors skip steps, which means that it'll be cutting in the wrong place. And so it took me a while to dial in the feeds and speeds for wood. I'm used to working with soft metals and soft plastics. So this speed is sort of the nice balance where it doesn't skip steps, but it also goes sort of as fast as it can, and it doesn't catch on fire. Here I am removing the sticky tape, the double-sided sticky tape from the back, and you can see on one side it's not cut all the way through. I have a tilt on the bed that I need to fix. But it was a successful cut, and I could just use a craft knife to finish off the control panel side. After cutting the desktop part, the next thing to do is to cut the display enclosures. So these are the 2 parts. You can actually see 2 early prototypes towards the front of the bench there. They hold the little 2.8-inch TFT display that will be on top of the desk. And so to prep that, I basically have a 5-inch wide sheet of cherry wood. I'm going to cut it to the right length so that it will hold all of the parts that I want to cut. I'll do that on the little table saw, and then I'll put double-sided tape on the back, and then I will clamp it to the CNC and start the job that actually runs the CNC cutting head. I think I made 4 or 5 of these display enclosure revisions before the one I'm about to cut and use on prototype 2. There was a bit of futzing around to fit the specific circuit board, but also make it something that could fit different circuit boards in the future. So there's an outer part that is the part of the enclosure that you'll see, but then there's an inner part that is, I'm calling the display rest, on which the circuit board is fit. And it has to hold the circuit board in such a way that it's at the right angle, and then it sits right up against the front of the enclosure itself. This tiny table saw is funny. It's pretty good for these quick, relatively straight cuts. It is not a precision instrument when I don't have a fence on it. You know, cutting the end off of a piece of wood that's then going to be cut by the CNC, it's sort of perfect. It's fast and easy. So there it's cutting the back of the display enclosure, and then it will cut the sides and the front, and then it'll move on to the parts that go into the display rest. Just so much sanding. You can see I'm using nail files to get into the little crevices there. But yeah, the CNC leaves tear out on most of the edges, so I might try a different bit at some point. But for prototype 2, there was just a lot of sanding. Now we're gluing up the display rest sides. You can see I have glued up the enclosure itself and put it towards the front of the bench there. So now we're just doing the sides, and then we'll let that glue dry and do an assembly. So this is the left display enclosure, and it will turn out to be the first of the actual prototype 2 display enclosures. I'm actually pretty happy with how this turned out. I can move around the vent slots back there so that the pieces are less fragile. But everything else worked pretty well. It holds the circuit board pretty well. It has sort of notches in the right place so that components don't interfere with the rest, and it sits very nicely, and it exactly covers the part of the display that is not actually lit up when it's powered on. Now that we have a good design that I'd like to use for prototype 2, I can go ahead and just do the same thing for the right display enclosure. So we'll just speed through the CNCing and glue up for that. Okay, all of the pieces are ready, and we're just doing final glue up and assembly of the last display rest. You can see I've cut out the control panel on the left side of the screen on the desktop, and then there is the rim of the platen, which is the hole for the documents to be scanned through. All right, I'm using a big weight on the sanding part because it's off balance. I fix that later, but for the moment I was just doing a kind of a bodge to make it work. I'm cutting a quick little run of acrylic here to use instead of glass. Shipping glass is kind of a pain and often causes heartaches. At long last, this is the final glue dry, and now it's time to take everything apart. Both the control panel and the platen are now glued to the desk, and I can take off these 1, 2, 3 blocks and see what we have. The CAD and CAM for the top part of the desktop took a while. There's a lot more complexity to it than there is for the bottom part that holds the single board computer and the circuit boards that handle the buttons and things. So I haven't made a lot of changes to that design. So this top part being done, I think finishing off and building the second half of this Memex is going to be no problem. If everything looks good, I'll actually go into production. Here's the little display that will sit inside. You can see it sort of rests on this, the little rails on the inside. It will be attached more firmly, but you can see it sits snugly inside the enclosure once it's put down on top of the display. This display comes with 4 holes for screws, but they make the board too wide, I think, for this. So I actually used the little table saw to cut off the 4 edges, the 4 little holes on the first circuit board. We'll see if I killed it. I left the other one unchanged. If I ended up damaging the board, I'll find a different way to cut off the little screw holes. Probably just a pair of snippers would do it. I am pretty pleased with how this looks. The screens are a little bigger than the illustrations compared to the size of the desktop, and it makes it a little bit cartoony and a little bit cuter. And I like that about it. I think it'll only take me a day or 2 in the shop to get the rest of the prototype 2 put together. I'm just getting started here on YouTube, and it would really help me if you would hit like and then the subscribe button if you're interested in seeing more projects like this. Okay, that's it for part 4. Next time we will dive into actually figuring out the circuitry and the electronics that will drive the displays and take input from the buttons and levers that are on the top of the desktop. I'll see you in the next one.